Thanks for coming back. It's always nice to have company. This is going to be the series of stories that were special pleasure parties in my time. I did pleasure parties for 40 years, and many of them are a unique situation. And some of them were a lot of fun, and some of them were just absolutely wild, but for so many reasons. So I'd like to start this series talking about the very first pleasure party I ever did. I had hosted my very first pleasure party as me, the hostess, on January 30th, after attending my first pleasure party in October of 1980. I was looking for flexible work hours since I had an infant to care for, and the representative said that, quote, my phone would ring off the hook. I was young and naive, and I believed her. I needed cash fast. Within 5 days of hosting a party, I purchased my first pleasure party kit. My first presentation was scheduled for February 4th, 1981, to be hosted by my good friend, Elaine. As it turned out, Elaine was an ideal pleasure party hostess. Number one, she didn't need coaxing to throw a party. Number two, she loved sex toys. And number three, she was friendly, outgoing, and enthusiastic. Number four, as an exotic dancer, she traveled in circles of single women who were inclined to enjoy erotica. The party took place in a modest suburban apartment. I half expected that her guests would all be strippers. Since I wasn't the host, I asked her permission to bring some of my friends to her party, and she said it was okay. Jeannie was the only one of my friends who took me up on my invitation. Along with 5 of Elaine's guests, there were 7 guests in attendance. 7 felt like the perfect number for a first show. Not too many to overwhelm me, but still enough guests to make it worth my while. In my introduction, I left out the fact that this was my very first pleasure party that I was presenting at. I was confident about my product knowledge. Plus, it also felt reassuring to have 2 friends in the audience to back me up in case I missed anything. Both Jean and Elaine seemed to instinctively know when to ask the right questions to encourage the guests to keep an open mind. It was great having them there. After a short introduction into the logistics of privacy and placing orders, I dove into my presentation. I gave the juiciest details I could to create a sensory experience of suggestive images that would make your mouth water and your kitty cat wet. By the time I got to the body candy, I had found my groove, and any nervousness I had from being new at this was gone. I realized that when you're there to give, instead of worrying about what you're going to get, the giving becomes effortless and worry dissipates, and everything turns out as best it can. That's been my experience. So I learned that my very first pleasure party. Within 10 minutes of my introduction, one of the youngest guests decided to be contrary. She had positioned herself squarely in the middle of the group. That was a little problem, but with arms and legs tightly crossed, her body language indicated that she wasn't open to any new ideas, and no one was going to change her mind. The surly look on her face told me that she was bored with life and sex and determined to stay that way. The first comment out of her mouth was, "Oh, you don't want that." I just smiled at her and replied, "To each his own." That stopped her for a moment. But as I pulled out the second product, she made another negative remark. "Oh, you don't need that." "Of course you don't," I concluded. "You only need bread and water to live, but who wants to live on just that?" And so it went for about 45 minutes. I'd show something, she'd shoot it down. Her comments reeked of accusation and disgust. It was terrible. She was moving uncomfortably in her seat. Her arms still were very tightly crossed across her chest, and every now and then she'd eye the rest of the group suspiciously, no doubt wondering what kind of perverts they were. Each time she made a negative comment, she'd look to see if anyone agreed with her. No one did. At first, I tried to be diplomatic. In those days, I had a very short fuse, no one to take crap from anyone. But I really wanted to present myself as professional, courteous, and helpful. I was kind of modeling myself after a college professor I had at Rutgers in human sexual biology with a dash of Joan Rivers. Can we talk? As I moved from the relatively soft-core edible body toppings to the more hardcore vibrators, her negativity intensified. If it hadn't been for Jean and Elaine all along, I would have set her shit straight much sooner. Instead, my friends had consistently counteracted everything she said, so I didn't have to. But by 3/4 into my presentation, I couldn't take anymore. I had reached my limit. Instead of speaking to the group, I looked directly at Mona and said, "So what is sex for you, Mona? Just dropping your drawers and fucking?" Not waiting for an answer, I continued, "Girl, you must have one boring sex life." Everyone's eyebrows went up. All eyes, which had been fixated on me, turned towards Mona. She sat there stunned, in disbelief that anyone, least of all someone trying to make sales, would reveal her deepest insecurity. Too bad for her. I'd hit the nail on the head. She was a novice and rigid and unknowledgeable in the ways of sensual sexuality. Shrinking back in her metal folding chair, she made no more negative comments. Satisfied that I had put an end to this harassment, I continued my presentation, confident I wouldn't be hassled anymore by the first and only heckler I've ever encountered. Today, when I think back on that show, I thank Mona. Her role as a heckler reminds me that fear about the unknown runs rampant and brings out people's insecurities. Because of Mona, I developed my presentation to stop potential hecklers in their tracks because I answered their objections before they ever had a chance to voice them. I just went right to the heart of it. Unless objections are based in scientific fact, I don't usually get challenged. In fact, over the years, I've had the distinct privilege of doing pleasure parties for quite a few medical doctors. They were all women, of course, a few colleges and universities, and for one of the annual Northeast Regional Mensa weekends. I'm very proud of that. When presenting to the doctors, I always ask for advice or suggestions to keep my information scientifically correct, appropriate, and helpful. I am pleased to say and report that I've gotten straight A's for my information. Mona is an extreme example of how a full third of women, 30% of women, think about sexual pleasure. Socrates called these women the wife. According to him, the wife was a woman who only wanted to have sex for the sole reason of procreation, not necessarily for pleasure or fun. What made Mona unique was that she actually voiced her opinions. Most Mona types reject the pleasure party invitation altogether. You don't see Mona wife types at pleasure parties. You just don't. And I can name 10 of them right off the top of my head because I know them personally. Some accept the invitation just to look like, like they could possibly be interested. Oh, yeah, I'm sort of interested. And then always, last minute, find a reason not to come. So they bow out. But, they get the invitation because, they want to at least seem like they are interested. And then The very few that have attended a pleasure party usually sit in the back of the room, tucked in a corner, just to see what all the hoopla is about. They couldn't care less. And with only 7 guests in attendance that first day, Mona was front and center. My hostess always defended Mona, saying that she was only 19 and she was sexually inexperienced and she'd grow out of it. I get it. For some, sex talk can be very uncomfortable. But it was her insistent negativity that made me realize that although I love fun, creative, adventurous, and even experimental sexual relations, many other women do not share my enthusiasm. I'm glad I'm not one of them. It's been said that everyone comes into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. If the reason I met Mona was for her to test my resolve to sell erotica, she certainly was successful. If it was for me to introduce her to a different way to look at sexual relations and pleasure, I hope I was successful. I hope you enjoyed this very first story of the series that I'll be doing over the next few months. Some of the most outrageous, funny experiences I've had presenting erotica. And what makes them so phenomenally unique and fun and exciting is the fact that they can only happen at a pleasure party. They can't happen at a birthday party. They can't happen at an anniversary party. They can't happen at, Easter, Christmas. They just can't. This is a specific kind of get together, and the conversation is adult talk, okay? And just for adults. And if you are there to grow. So if you want to hear some more of these wonderful stories and the possibility for growth in them, please join me every Wednesday night here at this station. If you have any questions, send them to ybi69@hotmail.com. It would be my pleasure to include them in the answer of the show. Thanks so much for joining me. It was a lot of fun. It always is. Good night.